It was late, and the university library was nearly empty. I had picked up a shift covering for a coworker who was out sick. The storm outside was relentless, each crack of thunder rattling the old windows of the building. I was never a fan of being there alone, especially on nights like that, but I needed the money. The library had a strange way of amplifying the smallest sounds when it was empty. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the occasional creak of the wooden floors. It all made me feel like I wasn't truly alone. But it was the wet footprints I noticed in the main hall that made me stop in my tracks. They started near the entrance, leading down the corridor toward the archival room where the oldest newspapers were kept. It didn't make sense. I hadn't heard anyone come in, and the security system at the front door was supposed to beep every time someone swiped their card. The footprints were uneven, as if the person was limping or dragging their feet. The storm had been bad, but I didn't understand why someone would be dripping wet inside. I hesitated, but decided to follow them. The hall was dim, the motion-activated lights flickering on as I walked. When I reached the archival room, the door was already open. I stepped inside, and there he was. A student, at least that's what he looked like, was hunched over one of the tables, surrounded by stacks of old newspapers. His clothes were drenched, water pooling beneath his chair, and his hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "The library's closing soon. Are you okay?" He didn't answer right away. He just kept flipping through the papers, muttering something I couldn't make out. When I got closer, I realized he wasn't looking at random articles. He was searching for something specific. "I need to prevent it," he finally said, his voice hoarse and desperate. "Prevent what?" He shoved one of the newspapers toward me, pointing at an article. "This," he said. The headline read, "Tragic Library Fire Claims One Life." The date on the paper was today's date. I stared at the article. The story detailed a lightning strike that had sparked a fire in the library. The building had been evacuated, but one person had died, a student who had tried to warn others before it was too late. "That's not possible," I said, looking up at him. "This has to be some kind of prank." But then I saw the photo printed alongside the article. The grainy black and white image showed a young man, soaked to the bone, his face eerily familiar. It was him. I stepped back, my chest tightening. How is this?" "I have to stop it," he said, his voice rising. "If I can just make them leave, it won't happen." I didn't know what to do. He was clearly out of his mind, but the article, the photo, it didn't make sense. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 11:48 p.m. The article said the fire started just before midnight. "Listen," I said carefully, "why don't we get out of here together? We can talk to someone." "No," he snapped, slamming his hands on the table. "I'm not leaving until it's safe." The lights flickered, and a deafening crack of thunder shook the building. I flinched, and when I looked back at him, he was gone. The chair was empty, the newspapers scattered on the table. The puddle of water was still there, but the footprints leading away had vanished. The storm outside was raging, the wind howling against the windows. I tried to tell myself it was some kind of elaborate prank, but then the fire alarm went off. The piercing sound echoed through the empty library, and I froze. Smoke began to seep from the vents, and I realized the article might not have been a warning. It was a prophecy. I ran for the exit. The scent of burning would growing stronger with each step. As I reached the front doors, I turned back one last time. Through the smoke, I saw him standing in the main hall, his face lit by the flickering flames. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. When the fire department arrived, they said the lightning had struck the roof, setting the archives ablaze. They found no one inside when they searched, but the article from that night was real. I saw it again later, in the same archival room. And the photo, it's still there. Only now, I'm in it too. It was a stormy Thursday night, the kind where the rain hammers against the windows like it's trying to get inside. I was working the graveyard shift at the mall, my third week on the job. Nothing ever really happens during these hours, just the occasional alarm set off by wind or a bird flying too close to the motion sensors. I remember the sound of the rain echoing in the vast, empty corridors. It made the place feel even lonelier than usual. Around 2 a.m., I started my rounds. The mall's lights were dimmed to conserve energy, casting long, eerie shadows. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness, but I knew the layout well enough by then. As I reached the food court, I spotted something on one of the tables, a black umbrella. It wasn't just any umbrella. It was one of those high-end ones with a polished wooden handle and intricate carvings. Definitely not the kind you'd expect someone to forget. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it. The rain outside was relentless, so I figured someone must have left in a hurry and planned to come back for it. When I turned it over, I noticed an engraving on the handle, property of Elb Novak. Beneath the name, there was a small metal tag with an address etched into it. That's when I decided to check the security footage. The cameras in the food court pointed directly at the table. Rewinding the footage, I watched a woman enter around 9:30 p.m., soaking wet from the rain. She carried the umbrella tightly, her knuckles pale as if she didn't want to let it go. She sat at the table for a while, staring ahead, motionless. After about 15 minutes, she stood up abruptly and walked out, leaving the umbrella behind. Here's the thing, no one saw her leave. The cameras covering the exits didn't show her walking out. She just vanished. It felt strange, but I convinced myself the footage was probably glitchy. Mall cameras weren't exactly cutting edge. I thought maybe she had left another way, through one of the side exits not covered by the cameras. I took the umbrella back to the security office and decided I'd try to return it the next day. When my shift ended at dawn, I still couldn't shake the thought of the woman. I don't know how to explain it, but her stillness in that chair was unnerving. I pulled out my phone and typed the address from the engraving into my GPS. It wasn't far, just a 15-minute drive. I told myself it was a kind gesture. People lose things all the time, and it's nice to return them. But deep down, I think I just wanted to know more about her. Who was El Novak? And why had she been sitting there in the dark, leaving without her umbrella? The house was small, tucked away at the end of a narrow street. The yard was overgrown, and the place had a weathered look, like it hadn't been lived in for a while. I knocked on the door and waited. The rain had eased up, but the air was thick with humidity. A man in his late 50s answered. His face was tired, like he hadn't slept well in years. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I think this belongs to someone who lives here," I said, holding up the umbrella. "A woman named El Novak." The man stared at it, his expression darkening. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his tone sharp now. "At the mall," I replied. "She left it behind last night." "I figured." "She's dead," he interrupted. "My daughter, Lisa. She's been dead for 3 years." I stood there frozen. He must have seen the disbelief on my face because he stepped back into the house and returned with a photograph. It was her, the same woman from the footage, down to the wet hair and the coat she'd been wearing. "She died in a car accident," he said quietly. "A rainy night, just like this. She was at the mall, picking up a few things after work. Witnesses said she was holding that umbrella when it happened." I didn't know what to say. The man asked me to leave, and I did, still holding the umbrella. I don't remember much of the drive back to my apartment. My thoughts were racing, trying to make sense of it all. Later that night, I decided to review the security footage again. I needed to know if I had missed something. But when I pulled up the files, the footage of her was gone. Not corrupted, completely missing, as if it had never been recorded. I don't work at the mall anymore. I left the job a week later, unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Every now and then, when it rains, I swear I hear footsteps outside my door. Slow, deliberate steps that stop just as suddenly as they start. I've stopped answering the door at night. Whatever, or whoever, left that umbrella, I'm not sure they're done with me yet. I've been a food delivery driver for over a year now. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays the bills. The other night, I had one last delivery before I could call it a day. It was pouring outside, one of those relentless rains where the windshield wipers never seem fast enough. My app pinged with an order for Pamela, with a delivery address in a neighborhood I didn't recognize. At first, I debated declining the order. The rain made everything harder, and I was exhausted. But the payout was surprisingly high for a single delivery, so I accepted it. The drive wasn't long, but about halfway there, my GPS rerouted me. A voice message explained that the usual route was flooded and unsafe. The detour took me down a winding back road, surrounded by trees so thick they formed a canopy overhead. The streetlights became sparse until there were none at all, just the glow of my headlights cutting through the sheets of rain. The new address popped up as 207 Old Mill Road. I hadn't noticed it earlier, but the app's delivery instructions specified to leave the order in the backyard. That struck me as odd. Most people just wanted their food left by the front door. As I got closer, the road turned into cracked asphalt, then dirt. My tires skidded in the mud as I approached a house that barely looked habitable. The place was dark except for one faint porch light flickering on and off, like it was barely holding on. The rain was coming down so hard it blurred everything, but even then, I could see the windows were boarded up. I checked my phone again to make sure I was in the right place. The app confirmed it. Arrived at 207 Old Mill Road. Leaving backyard. I grabbed the food and stepped out of the car. The rain soaked me instantly, and the air felt wrong, heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest. The only sound was the downpour and the squelching of my shoes in the mud. The backyard was worse. The grass was overgrown, weeds taller than my knees, and there was this overwhelming smell of wet earth and decay. I kept looking around, expecting someone to yell at me for trespassing, but the place seemed deserted. Then I saw it, a grave marker. It was half sunken in the mud, leaning at an angle like it had been forgotten for decades. The name on it stopped me cold. Pamela Mitchell. Died waiting for help during the flood of 1983. I stood there, staring at the stone, the food bag dripping water in my hand. My phone vibrated. When I glanced at the screen, it was another notification from the app. Customer is approaching. My stomach dropped. I looked around the yard, but I didn't see anyone. Just rain and shadows. The smell of earth got stronger, almost choking. Hello? I called out, but my voice sounded too loud, like it didn't belong in this place. There was no answer, just the rustle of wet leaves. Then something caught my eye near the base of the grave. The mud looked disturbed, like it had been dug up recently. A puddle had formed in the indentation, but I could swear I saw something move underneath the water. I wanted to leave. I told myself I'd just put the bag down and go, but the app wouldn't let me complete the delivery. It kept prompting, hand to customer. The rain started to let up, and that's when I heard it, a voice. A low, muffled whisper that seemed to come from all directions. Help me. I froze. It wasn't my imagination. The words were faint but clear. Who's there? The whisper came again, louder this time. Help me. Please. It was coming from the grave. I backed up, nearly slipping in the mud, and then the phone chimed again. This time, it wasn't a notification. It was a message. Pamela is here. The screen flickered, the words glitching in and out like static. And then I saw her. She was standing at the edge of the yard, just beyond the tree line. Pale, with water streaming down her face, her clothes tattered and clinging to her. Her eyes were dark pits, empty but locked on me. The bag slipped out of my hand, landing with a squelch in the mud. She took a step closer, her feet not touching the ground. I don't remember getting back to my car. All I know is that I was driving, speeding down that dirt road, the tires spinning in the mud. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the house was gone. Later that night, I checked the app again. The order had disappeared like it was never there. No record of Pamela or 207 Old Mill Road. But sometimes, when I'm out on a delivery late at night, my phone buzzes with a notification. Pamela is waiting.
Please subscribe for more stories.